There is a specific and often genuinely difficult pattern that a certain kind of child carries through school, through early jobs, through nearly every structured environment, a real inability to simply comply with rules and authority that feel arbitrary or unjustified, even when compliance would clearly make life considerably easier. This person is labeled difficult, oppositional, unable to just follow instructions the way everyone else manages to. And then later, this exact same person often ends up building something entirely their own, an actual business, an actual creative body of work, an actual independent path that answers to no external authority at all, precisely because they were never able to simply accept one in the first place. Carl Jung had a real explanation for why early difficulty with authority so often precedes exactly this kind of independent, self-directed success. Jung believed that genuine individuation, becoming fully and authentically yourself rather than simply conforming to whatever external structure happens to be handed to you, requires at some point a real willingness to question and resist authority that does not actually align with your own genuine sense of what is true and what is right. A person who complies easily and automatically with every external authority they encounter often never develops this capacity at all, remaining comfortably dependent on external structure their entire life. A person who struggles with authority early, however difficult this makes their early years, is developing, often without realizing it, exactly the internal compass eventually required to build something entirely their own, since they were never able to simply outsource their direction to whatever external structure happened to be in charge. This explains the strange, delayed arc, difficult and oppositional early, independently successful later, since the very trait that made this person hard to manage inside someone else's structure is the exact same trait required to build and run a structure entirely of their own, one that answers to their own genuine judgment, rather than an external authority they were never actually able to simply accept. If you recognize this pattern in your own life, hear this clearly. Struggling to simply comply with authority that felt arbitrary or unjustified was never reliable evidence that something was wrong with you or that you were simply difficult. According to Jung's understanding, it may have been the early, unrefined version of exactly the internal compass that eventually allows a person to build something entirely their own, rather than remaining permanently dependent on someone else's structure and someone else's rules. Here is what actually matters if you recognize this pattern. The specific challenge is learning to distinguish between authority genuinely worth questioning and simple reflexive resistance to any structure at all, since the goal was never blanket defiance for its own sake. It was developing a genuine internal sense of what actually deserves your compliance and what genuinely does not, a discernment that, once refined, becomes exactly the foundation independent, self-directed work actually requires. Think honestly about your own early relationship with authority and rules, and consider whether your difficulty complying with structures that felt arbitrary might actually have been building the exact internal compass now required for whatever independent path you are currently building or hoping to build. Right below the single word for the specific kind of authority you have always struggled hardest to simply accept without question. Naming it is the real and practical way you start seeing your early difficulty, not as a character flaw, but as the raw, unrefined material for building something entirely your own. Because struggling with authority and rules early in life was never, according to Carl Jung's understanding, simple defiance or a character flaw. It was very often the early difficult development of exactly the internal compass eventually required to build something entirely your own, one that no external authority was ever actually going to be able to contain.